people told me that this finished detail was never gonna last. Well, it's been 4 years since I've built this deck, and it looks like it's doing just fine to me. It's not coming off. Let me explain to you why I do this, and then let me show you how you can do it yourselves. I started doing this detail a while ago for a reason. They kind of call me the anti-miter on the internet because I don't like to miter a lot of my stuff. I don't like to miter my fascia. I don't like to miter my deck boards. You can kind of see that throughout my build, that I do a lot of butt joints and stagger joints and things like that. Now, this is just a personal opinion. The reason I butt join so much together, because if I tried to screw this corner together, remember, this has been 4 years, many thermal heat expansion and contraction cycles, okay? If I tried to screw this together as a miter, this would never stay like this. It would never look this good. It would never be this tight. This corner is Cortex together. Not only is it fastened to the decking and to the framing, this board is also attached to this board. So there's extra fasteners in this that's holding it together. But the one thing I don't like is when this is exposed. Now you can see right down here, I didn't do that detail here. I painted this end grain. It's a much smaller detail. I felt like it wasn't necessary. But up here, I want the grains to look good, and I want them to match, and I want them to be flush, and I want them to curve and look really pretty, all that good stuff. My thought was, what if I could take and make a piece of end grain material that matches the factory edge of the deck board and then glue it on there just like Formica, like a countertop or something like that, but use materials, glues, things like that in our profession to create this look. Would it last? I don't know, man. So to my knowledge, I'm one of the first people for exterior, outdoor living, PVC deck boards that has ever done this detail. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the first, but I'm not making that claim. Okay, but if you go back on our videos, maybe 5 years ago, you'll see us doing it for the very first time. Since that worked so well, I decided I'm gonna do it many more times, and I've done several different glue ups. Now, I've also done a different detail on corners. I've done some folded corners and heat bent corners and things like that. Those are cool as well, but for this particular project, this is what I did. I need to match this detail on the other side. We're building a deck on the other side of the house 4 years later, and I want everything to look exactly the same. We need to make these parts, and then we need to glue up a board so it looks just like this one, so that when we put this all together, it looks like this. So let's get going. All right, so we have a couple different sets of stairs that we need to trim. We also have the fascia boards on the deck to trim. We want the trim corners to look the same as they did over on that deck over there. We're not putting side fascia on these. We're gonna wrap these just like the deck was on the other side. We have a couple different elevations as well that we're dealing with. So we have some low rise steps over here, and then we have a standard height step along the way over there. So those stairs are gonna be 7.5 inches tall. These stairs are gonna be 6 inches tall. So what I'm getting at is I have 2 different thicknesses of trim pieces I need to make. So instead of doing 2 different types of decking materials to create those thin glue up pieces that we need, I'm gonna just make them all out of 7.25 inch TimberTech AZEK, and then I'm gonna cut them all down into the widths I need, and then I'm gonna use those for this different heights. So if I make them out of a wide piece, I know that I'm gonna be able to use them on the high steps, and then I can shave them down and use them on the low steps as well. What I'm doing is I'm making the same amount of pieces I need, but I'm creating myself less work because I'm just using one type of material. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any scraps, so I need to cut off a couple chunks off a brand new board so that I can make these pieces. I need to make 8 different corner edges. I need to make 8 different edge pieces for the various spots on this deck that are gonna need that glue up. It's also dangerous to make these parts. This is not something, if you're a novice, not sure if you're gonna wanna do this, but if you have the right pieces and the right jigs ready to go, it's much safer and it's a much cleaner way to get this done. So I'm gonna show you all that as we go through this, and hopefully teach you a little bit of something that you might be able to use in your future. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I need to cut a couple of pieces off of this board that I can use to create the parts I need for the end grain glue ups. I know that my table saw will cut up to about a 6-inch piece if I bring the blade all the way up, again, which is kind of dangerous, so we have a special jig to use for that. So I'm gonna cut these at 5 3/4. And why am I doing that? I'll explain. So I know if I cut it at 6, I'm really pushing the limitations of my table saw. Okay, there's my 5 3/4 inch chunk. I'm gonna be making some 1 inch wide pieces. So I wanna have over 5 inches. I said, well, I could just make them 5 inches, but then when I cut them on the chop saw, I'm gonna lose one of the widths because it's not gonna be a full inch wide. I need these pieces to be about 1 inch wide when I'm done, so that they will fit the thickness of the board. I need to make it so that I can cut this in half in 2 swipes on the table saw, and I'm not gonna run it through height-wise. I'm gonna turn it sideways and run it through that way so that I can get the blade to get through the middle of the board so I can have this piece. Once I have the piece I need, then I gotta cut them into the proper widths. That's why I'm making this 5 3/4, okay? I hope that made sense. If not, it will in a minute. So now I'm gonna go ahead and cut this. And since I'm only gonna get 5 pieces out of this, I need 8. I'm gonna go ahead and make 10 because sometimes 1 or 2 of them doesn't turn out so great. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut 2 of these at 5 3/4. All right, got our pieces. All right, guys, this is called a shop fox. And this is how I don't cut my fingers off when I'm trying to make this part. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to delaminate this outside skin off the surface of this piece of decking. And I've got this table saw blade maxed out at about 3 1/8 inches up. That's why I like a 10-inch table saw, because I can get a higher cut, which will help me get through this 5 3/4 inch piece. It's gonna have to be a double cut. Now I can safely keep my hands away from that blade. This is a really safe way to make this piece. It's the only way I'll do it. I used to do it with the fence of the saw, but one day I was like, you know what? I'm gonna lose a finger if I keep doing this. So if I wanna keep making these parts, I gotta find a better way. So that's what I did. I'm not endorsed by this company. They don't sponsor us, but it's called a shop fox. You can look at it on Amazon. There's a couple other brands. I suggest if you're gonna start making these parts that you get one of these jigs. They're anywhere from $200 to $300. How much is a finger worth though? For some reason, I don't know if it's because during transport or resetting of our trailer or whatever, the width got a little weird. So I'm gonna do a test cut in this before I go all in to make sure I have the thickness I want of the part. So that's what's next, is testing the thickness, making sure I'm happy with that. So I'm just gonna take a little jab on this, pull it back and take a look at it before I run it all the way through. Man, that's just a little bit too thick in my opinion. So I'm gonna make a micro adjustment and bring it over. I like this edge. This edge is really cool, but it's just a little too much. So I've done this so many times, I kind of know what I'm looking for, right? So I'm gonna cinch this back in, nice and snug. I'm gonna bring it back up to the blade, and then I'm going to make an adjustment on the table. And there's a micro knob right here, a micro adjustment knob. I'm gonna bring that over, and I'm gonna start turning this knob to bring this in where I think I need it. And then I'm gonna make another stab at it and see where I'm at until I get this thing dialed in. So here we go. Okay, still not quite. You can see it moved over a little bit, but not quite enough because it's still a fairly thick end piece. I want this a little bit thinner, not a whole bunch, just a little bit thinner than this. So again, I'm gonna take another stab at it. Usually I don't have to do this with the adjustment. Usually it's right on point, but because we haven't used this in a while, and the blade might be walking a little bit too, I'm gonna start a brand new cut on the back side of this. There it is. That's what I'm looking for thickness. That's a perfect size little piece. We can cut these down and glue up, and I think that's the right one. So I'm happy with that. I was looking for about 1/8 of an inch, and that's what we got. We're gonna cut through one side, and then I'll flip it over, and then I'm gonna have to add a shim to keep this pressure equal so that we end up with a decent piece of material. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and make my through cut all the way through the board. You can see how close the blade gets to the top of this, but it's not going to cut into it. So I'm halfway through. That looks great. Now I'm going to take a shim. I'm going to put a shim right here so that when I clamp this down, it doesn't push this piece too out of whack. I'm going to get a nice snug fit on that. And now I'm going to cut through the other half. All right, here we go. Started to bind up, so I backed out a little bit to let the blade wind back up, but you'll notice that the piece is still here, the shim is still here, everything's still locked in. I'm gonna loosen that up. It did take a little bit off the tip of the shim, so if you're doing a lot of these, eventually you're gonna have to use a new shim. Okay, there's my piece. Not bad. There's a little bit of a discrepancy right here, but I can either sand that out or I can shave it or I can not use that piece. Like I said, I'm making a couple extra pieces. I got a little bit of a winger right here. So as we cut these into strips, that'll minimize, but then if I need to, I can take it on a belt sander and just kind of rub it a little bit while the belt sander's running and file that down. But let's see how the next piece turns out, because this one was kind of a tester, but still gonna get some good end pieces out of this for our project. So we're gonna make one more of those. Okay, so now that we have our laminations cut, split from the outside of the board, we need to cut them to width. So I plan on getting 4 or 5 pieces out of each one of these. So I know that my decking's about 1 inch thick. So I'm gonna cut them just a little bit less than 1 inch thick. Why? Because once you glue them up, you need a little bit of wiggle room in case you move them back and forth a little bit. And it looks better if this piece is a little bit shy versus it being too proud. If it's too proud, you start trying to sand it and shave it down, and then you can damage the connecting piece, which you don't want to do. So just cut them like 15/16 instead of 1 inch or something like that. And we're gonna set up a jig. We do that a lot when we're making parts. Okay, so obviously I'm not gonna sit here and measure this every single time to make this cut. As this piece gets smaller, my fingers are getting very close to the blade. So I have another technique I'm gonna show you guys what I do to be able to make these parts without putting my fingers so close to the blade. But for now, let's figure out where this is gonna stop. That's where I want to cut it, okay? So now I need to have a piece that I can clamp down to the saw, and I just so happen to have a couple scrap deck boards. So I can take this and go like that, and I can clamp this board down to here, and then that keeps this from moving, and it gives me the proper width I need to make these little thin strips. Okay, so unfortunately, that made this board go up, so it makes it so I can't do that. So let's flip this over and see if we can get it to clamp down the opposite way so that I have what I need. Okay, that'll work. It's still a little high, but it still stops where it needs to. Okay, so for my first couple cuts, if I was comfortable, as long as my fingers aren't in this yellow zone, and I don't have a 0 clearance plate on this saw, unfortunately, but that's okay. I could go ahead and make my first cut and get this piece made. But once I get my fingers closer to here, I don't want to do that anymore. So what I usually do is take a piece of scrap, put it over the top of this. I cut through the scrap and through my part. So I'm cutting 1 inch off my scrap every single time, but it's much safer than trying to use my fingers as support. So let's do that. I happen to have another piece of scrap right here. I have the part where I want it. I'm gonna cover it completely, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut through this, and then I'll have my first piece made and ready to go. So let's go ahead and get that done. You want to be patient when you're making these cuts, okay? Don't pick the saw up while it's still spinning. Let the saw finish its cut. There's my first piece, and it's gonna fit really nice on there. It is a little bit shallow, but it's not bad. So I'm gonna make this piece a little bit wider. I'm gonna move my jig just a little tiny bit to make the next 4. This is still acceptable, but I can do a little bit better. But see, when it's glued on, it's gonna have this end grain that looks like that. Then we take some end grain paint and we match the color of the paint to the board. Obviously this is the wrong color, but that's not a bad one. But I am gonna adjust this just a little tiny bit. Okay, that's less than a 1/16, or maybe a 1/16. Okay, let's try that. That looks really good. It's just a little bit shy of the width of this, but once it glues up, that'll look really awesome. That's the width I want. So I got 2 down. I'll probably get 3 more out of this piece, and then I'll cut my next piece in, and then we'll get to the next step. So that's all that was left off of that 5 3/4. Because of the blade widths, that was the scrap that was left from getting 5 of these out of 1 piece. All right, so I'm ready to make my first fascia board. Here's my end cut right here. All right, so this piece I want to glue on like so. But remember, it's too big because remember I told you earlier, some of the boards are wide and some of the boards are not. So this one I have to cut down a little bit. So let's mark it. This is gonna be the top. This is gonna be the bottom. There's a little bit of thickness difference from the bottom to the top. So I'm gonna use the top as the upper part and the thinner part down below. Okay, so there's that. I'm gonna mark this. Now I could go over and cut this on the chop saw and that would be fine, but it is a little dangerous. Okay, we've done a lot of dangerous cuts today. So let's do a safe one. Use a pair of tin snips and you can just cut this pretty much with a pair of tin snips like so. Real easy, okay? Any other final details, you can always use a file or a rasp or something like that to equal it out. Now that that's done, I'm going to put some glue. This is PVC trim adhesive by Titebond, all right? And this is their stuff called accelerator, or I call it activator. And it's like an instantly bonding agent. So in 10 seconds, once I add the glue to this side and the activator to this side, the accelerator, then this piece, I can just hold it in place for 10 seconds and then it's good to go. Now, because I know for longevity purposes, we may want to make sure that instead of just slopping in our glue and then going for it, we're gonna smooth this out on this particular piece. I don't want too much or too little in any particular spot. So I'm gonna kind of smooth this out because this stuff can be white if you put too much glue on. Anything else, I'm just gonna kind of take it to the side and swipe it back. Okay, I know that this side of the board is up, this side of the board is gonna be down, so I wanna put my cut side down so you don't see it. All right, so I'm gonna spray some accelerator. You don't need a whole lot. That was enough. Okay, now I like to put these on from one side like so. Make sure I've got the height and the width that I'm looking for. And then I'll put the rest of it on like so. I'll wipe this a little bit because it's going to turn white. And then just like that, you've got your instant bond. I can see my piece is just a little bit long, so I can either go back with my tin snips and cut this again. That looks pretty good. And then I can go back with a rasp and I'll detail the edges. Because since the board has kind of a curved edge to it, I want to make sure that my edges of my piece kind of match that. So I'm going to flip this over and do the back as well. Okay. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll take a little bit of touch-up paint and I'll touch up this edge because the color is not quite 100%. And the backside, you may or may not see the color, but I go ahead and do it anyways and get any other imperfections out of the way, like so. Just so it looks really nice when it's done. So I have this, it's a little bit older paint, but it will look great once we dry it in. So we'll put that in like that. I'll grab a towel and I'll swipe that, and then I'll take a heat gun and I'll kind of bake it on there real quick. Yeah, man. All right, guys. So there you have it. There's your end grain piece that's all color matched and looking good to go. So if you like this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when we're putting out new content. Hope you got something out of this. If you do, don't forget to click subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.